People think certain problems are low income problems or high income problems. The reality is the cash flow change is very real for everybody at every income level, right? For most people, income is going to stay the same between the two parties, but now that same income needs to support two households. That's challenging, right?
Welcome to The Details with Allison Kahler, a space for real divorce stories and grounded conversations with experts, helping you find clarity and courage as you step into a future that may look different than you expected and better than you thought possible. My guest today is Leah Hadley. Leah is a financial planner and a certified divorce financial analyst. She's also the author of Intentional Money. Today, we talk about the 6 pillars of how to get intentional with our money, and Leah even gives a tip for how you might find tens of thousands of dollars that could be hiding. It's kind of like the equivalent of finding that $20 bill in a winter jacket when you pull it out for the season. Let's get into my conversation with Leah. Welcome to The Details, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me.
So excited to have you here to talk about the topic of intentional money. So to get us started, what is intentional money?
Well, one of the things that I've seen, Allison, over the years is people just kind of doing things by default and not necessarily really being mindful or thoughtful about some of the ways that they both earn, spend, and invest and save, for that matter, as well, their money. And so intentional money is all about, let's be more proactive, thoughtful, mindful about how we use our resources.
Yeah. And so what's important about this concept of intentional money through the lens of divorce and that being a major life transition that many of our listeners are going through?
So for a lot of people, and that's why we call our company Intentional Divorce Solutions, a lot of people approach the divorce process in a very reactive way. And honestly, the whole process is set up to be very reactive, especially if you're doing it through the courts and the legal system. But our approach is really about being present to the decisions that you're making, sure that you are informed and you're educated, you know what your options are, and you're looking at things through the lens of not just like what's uncomfortable today and how do I get through it as fast as possible, but how do I really build for my future and how do I be thoughtful about the decisions that I'm making around money so that way I am setting myself up for future financial success.
Yeah. And you've gone through your own divorce experience. So how did that shape your perspectives to this topic and the group of people that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only did I go through my own divorce, but my parents divorced when I was 8 years old as well. And I was raised by a single mom after that. And so having that experience and seeing the challenges that she experienced, but also the amazing experiences she was able to provide for us despite being a single mom. And so what I learned through the work that I'm doing is my mom was incredibly resourceful. And I'm so fortunate and grateful to be able to say that. But so many of us don't have those experiences, right? And so really being able to look and see, like, how can we better support one another through the process and what resources are out there, and connecting people with those resources is so incredibly powerful. When I went through my own divorce, I was already a financial professional. I had started my career in equity research. I had become a financial advisor already, working with individuals and families. Allison, it didn't matter. I was still completely overwhelmed by all the financial decisions that I had to make through the divorce process. When we got divorced, we bought our house in 2007. So right before the market crashed. Now everybody is like fighting over the beautiful equity that's been created in real estate. Back then, when we got divorced, a lot of us were underwater with our mortgages. Values had come down so much. And so it wasn't who gets the house, it was who's stuck with the house, right?
Yeah.
And our children were young at the time. I want to say my youngest was like maybe 3. So they were like 3, 7, and 8, something like that. And trying to have stability for them, figuring out how was I going to be able to earn money in a consistent way and still be a present mom and not have a partner and all of those different things. It was a lot. And so having that experience myself, recognizing it obviously in my family and kind of what my mom experienced, I knew that with the right support, the process doesn't have to be as difficult. And so that's really what has inspired me and motivated me to continue to support people through divorce.
Yeah. And what are some of the things from your own divorce experience that you said you were in the financial profession before, but things that you couldn't sort of anticipate beyond the mortgage side? What were some of those other things that you learned experiencing it firsthand?
Well, I mean, I think just the changes in cash flow are difficult no matter what
Yeah.
your situation is. We work with people at all different income levels. And a lot of times people think certain problems are low income problems or high income problems. The reality is the cash flow change is very real for everybody at every income level, right? And so acknowledging the fact that for most people, income is going to stay the same between the two parties, but now that same income needs to support two households. That's challenging, right? And I know for my ex-husband, he ended up working more hours. So he worked a regular job and then part-time job, picking up extra hours. But then also, even with him trying to deal with taking on more hours, but also time with the kids, right? So it was that. And I have to say, we were very fortunate in that we were realistic. Like, we were both having a hard time. That first year, Allison, one of the hardest years of my life. There's no question about it. And we were realistic with one another. And so we were helpful in that way. I mean, certainly there was a lot of anger. There was a lot that needed to be processed that first year. But we were also like, hey, like, we don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. How can we work together and like make sure he's getting the hours that he needs, make sure I'm able to work when I need, and really solve some of our cash flow issues that way. But in all honesty, if we hadn't been able to communicate and support each other, that would have been even harder than it was.
Yeah. So some of our listeners may have that relationship with their ex-spouse where they can work together through that first year. Others, they may be kind of doing this on their own because they don't have that partnership. But walk us through how intentional money can help people as they're navigating this big change in their life.
Yeah, the biggest thing and the first pillar of the intentional money method is clarity. So many people enter this divorce process and, in all honesty, get through the whole process without having clarity around their finances. And the fact of the matter is you cannot make good decisions. You might get lucky, but you really can't make good informed decisions unless you have that clarity. And so you really want to be very clear on your entire financial picture. What's coming in? When is it coming in? What's going out? When is it going out? What are your assets? What do you own? What are your liabilities? What do you owe? Getting super crystal clear on your financial picture. But then a lot of times people are so overwhelmed with all the changes that they're going through, not necessarily thinking about their future. You really want every decision that you make through the divorce process to be setting you up for the future that you want for yourself. And if you have children, the future you want for your family, right? And so getting that clarity doesn't just include, hey, what's my starting point? Where am I at? But it's also getting really clear on what matters to me, what's important to me, and what ultimately am I building toward, right? That allows us to make decisions that are really setting ourselves up for that chapter that we want to come next.
Yeah. And I imagine for people that maybe aren't in the details of their own financial picture to start, that can be a really scary first step to take. But once you do get that visibility into the current state of your financial affairs, then it really empowers you to look ahead with like, okay, this is where we're starting from, right?
Exactly. And, so many people fit in this space of just unknown, which feels really uncomfortable. Like, I just don't know what my future is going to hold, what that's going to look like, what my settlement is going to be. And we may not know with certainty because obviously things get negotiated through the process. But we have enough context to have a pretty darn good idea about what things are probably going to look like as far as the settlement goes. And that allows us to really run those projections. So you're not doing this sort of like in a silo of like looking at what is this today, but we're really looking at it. Okay, what is this today? And what does it mean for my future? And how can I start to plan and think through very clearly what I want for myself?
When people are going through that first pillar around clarity, what are the elements that they often miss, right? What are the ones that are often hidden or like, oh gosh, I didn't think about that? Super curious on that.
Yeah, it comes up in all different kinds of ways, honestly. I mean, it really, everybody's, and I think it's important to recognize everybody's financial situation truly is unique. And I know a lot of times people are looking and searching online for answers, and a lot of times getting really bad advice because your context may not be considered, right? But we see everything from, people have debt that they don't realize, certainly spending patterns. Like sometimes people talk about it as like a leak in a boat, right? Like they don't realize how much money is leaking out every month. All kinds of forgotten accounts out there. You'd be surprised, Allison. Sometimes I'll be going through somebody's tax return, I kind of as a double check to make sure that, we have everything from Discovery. And there's this like brokerage account that they completely forgot about. Not necessarily like they're hiding money. In some cases, it's our own client who may have not given the information. So a lot of stuff gets forgotten. We get busy with life and, day to day. And people receive money in all kinds of ways. People inherit things. People receive gifts. They obviously work for money. But there's a lot of different ways that people get money. And accounts get opened in different places and get forgotten about. You've been amazed at how many accounts we've found that were escheated to the state just because of that lack of communication with the financial institution. I mean, we have found tens of thousands of dollars for clients. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's like the really fun version, I guess, if you can get it back. But like, it's like when you find the $20 bill in the coat that you left in the closet and you're like, oh, like finding $10,000 is way better than the $20.
Well, I literally just did a free masterclass like 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned some of the money that some of our clients found. And a woman it was just a free masterclass she attended, she was like, that was the most valuable 45 minutes. I just found $600. And I was like, score.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So if anybody is wondering, you can go to Unclaimed Funds with your state and you can search your name and information and see if you have any money that has been escheated to the state that way.
I'm looking that up immediately after we finish this recording. Okay. So clarity is the first pillar. There are 6 pillars total for intentional money. Walk us through what pillar number 2 is.
Yeah, so the second pillar is values. And this is really important. A lot of times when people are married, they find that through the marriage, they may compromise some of their values over time, especially if somebody's been married for a long period of time. It's natural. It's not something that there's no judgment around it. It's completely normal. But when we're going through this process, it's good to be able to recognize if you have found yourself in that place, and it might make you think about things a little bit differently, right? A lot of times when people are going through the divorce process, they're actually trying to keep their life as similar as possible as it was prior to the termination of marriage. And that's just because that's safe, that's what we know, what have you. But when we really get in touch with ourselves, sometimes we find out that we haven't necessarily been living our values in a meaningful way. And this is a great time to kind of have that reset of looking at what's really important to me. For some people, and I talk in the book about this, sometimes people are raised to tithe the church. That's something that is absolutely paramount to them. And then they find a partner that may not be in alignment with that. And that can feel like a really big loss for somebody where that's important to them, right? And so recognizing what are those things that maybe you stopped doing that you want to bring back into your life, or things that you are doing that maybe don't really reflect what matters most to you, right? A lot of the people that I'm working with through this process are always telling me, first and foremost, family is the most important thing. Well, if that really is the case, you may look at your decisions a little bit differently if that's absolutely what you want to prioritize, right? Whereas if something else is most important, maybe you're really focused on your health and that's the most important thing, you may make some different decisions based on that. So we really look at having values impact not just your financial decisions, but really how you're choosing to live moving forward. One of the very common things that comes up for people is a house is a big point of contention in a lot of divorces, right? Fact of the matter is, Allison, a lot of people buy a house that they cannot afford as a couple, as two people, and still reach their financial goals. They might be able to afford it in terms of like cash flow or underwriting, but they're not necessarily allocating in such a way that they're still working toward their goals, right? So if you're already struggling to be able to pay for a house that you couldn't afford on 2 incomes, and now you're trying to make it happen on 1 income, sometimes it's just not possible. But sometimes if people do decide to do that, they're putting themselves in a very precarious financial situation? Well, when you look at your values, if financial stability, if security is the most important thing to you, or one of the most important things to you, then you don't want to stretch so far when it comes to how much you're spending on your housing costs.
Yeah. You mentioned family being one of the most common. What are some examples of other values that pop to the top of people's lists?
Yeah, for a lot of people, faith is first and foremost. Family comes up a lot. Health, we work with a lot of people. It's very common for people to divorce a little bit later in life, maybe when the kids are growing up, kind of going off to college, that kind of age. Health becomes a major issue for a lot of people in that age demographic. And so sometimes that's a big focus.
Yeah. And so then how do you translate, you come up with this list of values. How do you then translate that? Okay, so what do I go do about this with the money? If you take, a few of those examples you just mentioned.
Yeah, if we look at the example that I just shared with family as an example, right? And we're looking at making some financial decisions. Well, we may be looking at how do I remain physically close to family, right? Like if that's important to me and I want to make sure that we have a physically close relationship, then when I'm making my decisions about where I'm living, I might be looking to live close to them. Now, sometimes people get stuck on the existing house as part of the marital estate for this reason, because it's next to family or down the street from family or around the corner from family, right? But it's also not the only solution that allows you to still be close to family. And if that's really what we're solving for, that's such beneficial information, because then we can look at, well, what other options are out there that allows you to hit that goal that may be a better financial decision for you.
Great. Okay, so we've got clarity and we've got values. What's pillar 3?
Pillar 3 is mindset. And this is one that I joke sometimes, but honestly, it's true. People are going through a divorce. Everything in your life that has triggered you in your past is about to welcome itself back into your existence. I mean, really, like old stories from childhood come up and from young adulthood and from when you were dating and from during your marriage, and all kinds of stuff comes to the surface when people are going through this big transition. It really does bring up a lot of fears, a lot of things that maybe you have kind of put to the side. We want to start to become aware of the messages that are going on in our heads. So a lot of times, and we talked about the house being a big point of contention. The biggest issue that people argue about in divorce cases is spousal support. In most areas of the country, it's completely negotiable, and there's a lot of factors that are considered, but there's not a lot of clear calculators around it, which makes it challenging for a lot of people. And so it can be a big point of contention for people. Well, Allison, if I am approaching the divorce negotiations under the assumption that I am not able to earn or my income is limited for whatever reason, you better believe I'm going to be fighting extra hard to make sure that I'm going to have the support that I need to be able to take care of myself. But if I believe that my income potential is unlimited, that I know that I can take the steps that I need to do, get training, whatever that looks like, in order to be able to have the income that I need to support myself, that negotiation, there's just not as much baggage associated, not as much weight to it, right? Now, for some people, you're facing a very real situation where maybe there's a disability, there's a reason why income is very limited, and that's a different conversation. But if you're just in a place where maybe you haven't earned that much in the past and you just don't know what your earnings capability is, that's a mindset story, right? That's a story that we're telling ourselves that, in fact, we can really unpack and get you to a place of suddenly that piece of the negotiation doesn't feel so big, right?
Yeah.
But it comes up in everything, right? Mindset around debt. A lot of times people are absolutely terrified of, not being able to handle their debt, that kind of a thing. That can be very stressful when people are negotiating. All kinds of messages are coming up for people, and we just want people to bring awareness to them, not necessarily to judge it as right or wrong. A lot of these stories that we tell ourselves are for our own protection, for our own safety, right?
Yeah.
But acknowledging them and allowing that acknowledgement to then come to the forefront of your mind so you can decide. At that point, when it becomes a conscious belief or thought, then we can make a decision about it. But when it's kind of running in the background and we're not paying attention to it, then it's making decisions that we're not even in control of. And that's the opposite of being intentional with your money, right?
Yeah. Well, I won't try to bring it to the surface, but there's a Carl Jung quote that's something about like making the subconscious conscious, and I will butcher it if I try it here, but I think that makes so much sense, and it's probably why there's so much emotional charge associated with the negotiations around divorce, because yes, people will be looking for certain amounts of money or the house, et cetera, but it's really like, what is that linked to, and what is the emotional connection to it, or what is the belief that I have about myself that is really driving the emotional charge that sits with that negotiation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a big deal in the parenting plans too.
Yeah.
And I just really, really encourage people to focus their attention on what kind of experience you want your kids to have in your family, and less so about kind of what your needs are as a parent, right? But what we really put the focus on the kids and their needs and what we want them to experience as a family. We're looking at things differently, kind of reframing the decisions that need to be made.
Yeah. So for that mindset piece, I imagine a first piece of it is just the self-awareness and the recognition of making the subconscious conscious. But what are some of the things you recommend that people do to help like navigate that emotional challenge, get into, or maybe that's not even the goal, to be in a positive mindset, but how do you help them get a supportive mindset through this process?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's so important because so many people try to do it on their own. Yeah. And it is doable. It is doable on your own. It is very hard to do on your own. It is very hard to recognize in yourself. We have a membership program called the Empowered Sisterhood. And these are the kinds of conversations that people have and recognize in one another, right? So when you find that supportive group, whether it's a divorce coach that you might be working with, or a CDFA, or it may even be your attorney, whomever you're kind of walking through and processing these things through with, you want somebody who's going to say to you, hey, I'm hearing this story and I don't know if that's really serving you, right? Yeah. When you have people who are honest around you and can kind of recognize these things, again, saying it without judgment is critical to having this be a constructive process. But when you have people like that in your space, all it is a matter of just literally having somebody point it out to you, and then you get to decide what you want to do with it, right? But it can be very hard to do on your own.
Great. All right. So mindset's pillar 3. What's pillar 4?
So pillar 4 is strategy. And for a lot of folks, this is kind of the starting point for them. But I really encourage you to start with getting clear and knowing what your values are and what are some of those stories that are present as we start to look at strategy. Okay. Yeah. Because first of all, the same strategy for you, Allison, might not be the right strategy for me. And that's important. Even I'm always surprised that people always put like blanket questions in a Facebook group or something like, hey, can somebody recommend an attorney to me? And I love to recommend attorneys because I think good attorneys are so incredibly valuable. But I always have like 5 more questions to ask before I'm going to refer somebody to an attorney, because the good attorney for you may not be a good attorney for me, right? And so I think it's really important that we understand the context before we really get strategic. Now, with that being said, I absolutely want people to be efficient with their resources, to make sure their money is working as hard as possible for them. I love watching the shift with people where they're kind of earning and accumulating through their career, and suddenly their money is making more money for them every year than they are making in their careers. That's so empowering to know, like, hey, I don't have to do all the work, right? But it's coming up with the strategy that's appropriate based on your specific situation and your unique goals.
Yeah. Can you share a few examples? Just, I spent almost 20 years in strategy consulting, and I feel like anytime people would ask me to describe what I do, like, what is strategy? So, what are some examples of strategies that you help people with?
It's everything when it comes to money or divorce. I mean, everything from even what process do you want to pick, right? So when somebody is deciding how to go about going through the divorce process, they may file a divorce with the court and use the court system through that process. But a lot of people are choosing alternative methods for dispute resolution, right? Whether that's mediation or it's collaborative divorce or it's a cooperative process. All of the processes can work. They're not all going to work for everybody, and they're not all going to work the same way, right? When I have a woman who comes to me who has experienced a lot of emotional or financial abuse during the marriage, I want to make sure that they have a good, strong legal advocate. When
Yeah.
I am working with somebody who has really been in a partnership with the marriage and really actively engaged in the finances, has a clear sense of what exists, mediation may be a really good, solid option for that particular family. But it's not for everybody. And absolutely, everybody doesn't need to use the court system to solve their issues, right? And so
Yeah.
even that piece, but strategy is throughout the whole process.
Yeah. And I love this because something I learned actually it's episode 4 for people that want to go back and listen, but we had attorney mediator Melissa Farrig on the podcast, and she actually helped explain like, what is a collaborative divorce? What is mediation? Because there are these things that you're like, oh, collaborative, like, oh, it's just like we're being collaborative. It's like, no, it means something very specific in the divorce context. So if you're curious to learn more about that, go listen to episode 4. But yeah, I think some people just aren't aware that there are so many different approaches that are out there. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And even things like the house is a huge one right now that's really
Yeah.
challenging for families because the real estate market has been very strong for a while. And so if people have owned their home for a while, a lot of them do have significant amount of equity in the house. And if they have a mortgage on the house and they've had that mortgage for a while, a lot of folks have very, very low interest rates on those
Right.
low mortgages. If they need to be refinanced, they're looking at potentially double or more their interest rate.
Right.
So the house is a big issue in divorces right now in the current market. And a lot of times people think either one person keeps the house, the other person keeps the house, or it's sold, right? But I always tell people there are so many different solutions that we can look at any of the things that we're considering. There are tons of different solutions. There's not just one, there's not two, there's not three. There are numerous, countless solutions. And so opening your mind to that possibility and looking at those different options is really empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. So beyond strategy, what comes next?
Action. And this is an area where, and I get it, so many people who are in this huge life transition can feel very paralyzed. Totally normal. Again, you're experiencing a lot of change. Your body wants safety. Your mind wants safety, right? I get where it's coming from. But it is really important that you take action. And a lot of times you got to take the action before you feel ready, because people think that you have to have the confidence before you take the action. But taking the action is what builds the confidence. And so we really, really emphasize for people who are struggling in this area. We have a lot of people who may just be financially avoidant or not want to make certain decisions or what have you. Let's celebrate the heck out of any action that feels comfortable, as small or big as it is, right? We just had a client who opened her first checking account in her adult life, and we celebrated the heck out of that because that's a huge milestone for
Wow.
her. You know, for somebody else that may feel small, but that felt like something that was very hard to do, and to go in and open the bank and the branch, it was a lot for her. And so we make sure to really recognize that some of these actions can feel insurmountable, and we want to just acknowledge that people are making fantastic progress every step they take.
Yeah. And I've been doing a lot of research lately around nervous system regulation and some of the responses that we go into when our nervous systems aren't regulated. And so you might have heard fight or flight, but there's also this freeze or fawn kind of response that people can go into. And so this lack of action might be one response, I imagine. But then there's also some people, I imagine, who are like, I just want to get this done as soon as possible. And they're moving like a bull in a china shop. And so for some of those folks too, it actually like the opposite might be the medicine, right? Where it's like, take a beat, slow down, think about what you're doing, right? The goal is not necessarily speed to get to the end outcome, right?
And that is why action comes after strategy, right? We want to make sure that we have a clear strategy in place before we are taking that action. Absolutely. You're right. Allison, so many women in particular are so uncomfortable in the middle of the divorce and so uncomfortable with the lack of visibility, what the conclusion of the divorce is going to lead them to, that they just want to get through it. Just get through it as fast as they possibly can. And when people do act in that fashion, a lot of times they make mistakes that just we can't fix. I mean, once the settlement is done, it's done, especially in terms of the financial settlement. And so taking the time to get that clarity and to have that strategy is really important before taking the action. Yeah.
All right. Final pillar, pillar 6. Bring us home.
Yeah, this is about support. And there is a lot of messaging out there right now. And I think especially even with AI garnering so much attention as well, that we should be able to do everything ourselves, that all the information is available, that we can easily do the research now with AI, we can search things, whatever it looks like for you. And I just really encourage people to lean on their community, to find support, whether it's professional support or it's support in your family, your friends, in your faith community, whatever that looks like for you. Recognize and acknowledge that you're going through a really big change.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not have the clarity of mind to be able to think about all the things that you need to think through, right? That's totally and completely normal. And support is that piece of, when we were talking about mindset before, where somebody can say like, hey, I hear you saying this, but before you were saying this was the most important thing to you. Do you want to talk more about that? You want to think that through? Again, no judgment, but let's just acknowledge what you've said is really important to you and how sometimes the momentum of the process itself can kind of sweep you away into something that is not necessarily what you want. So I think support is incredibly valuable. I think that people try to use their attorney to do too many things. Your attorney is truly there for legal advice. That is what their role is.
Yeah.
And there are some wonderful, loving attorneys who will absolutely be happy to process things through with you and talk things through with you. There are some very financially savvy attorneys out there who can help you with the numbers. But the reality is, for most people, you're actually going to save a tremendous amount of money if you do your emotional processing either with a coach or a therapist or a support group, and you get your financial analysis done with a financial professional, and you get your legal advice through your attorney. And I know a lot of times people think like, oh my God, if I involve another professional, that's just going to cost more.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of people, you'll actually find you save a lot of money, especially when you invest in the emotional processing piece.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. And there's things that I learned through my own divorce experience, being that with my group of friends or my therapist, et cetera, it was helpful to have a different range of people to go to for that support, right? Because sometimes I did want that person who was going to be very coach-like and hold up the mirror and give me a little you said this before, exactly as you said, sort of, somebody to help pressure test your thinking in a really thoughtful, non-judgmental way. And then it's also helpful to have the friend that is fired up and they're by your side and they're being your cheerleader and you can vent, whatever. So having a variety of support emotionally is really useful. But then the thing that I honestly didn't really learn until starting this podcast and having all these conversations was just the value of having that professional support team, where it's really hard to go find the Swiss Army knife, the one person that can do it all. And even though, as you said, you think it's going to cost more money to do that, it actually probably saves you more money over time to find the right experts in the right area to support you through this process. So
I think divorce coaches in particular are undervalued. I think even if all you use them for was how to very efficiently use your time with your attorney, you would find that you were worlds ahead of where you would be otherwise. And they can do so much more than that. So yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So I love these 6 pillars. So just to repeat for our listeners, it's clarity, values, mindset, strategy, action, and support. So, what comes up to me as I hear these and listen to you talk, Leah, is just how empowering it can be if you have all of these things in place. But what gets in the way, right? It sounds easy when we talk about it this way, right? It's this is super clear, but what are the roadblocks or the obstacles that prevent people from being intentional with their money?
Mindset is first and foremost the biggest obstacle. And again, it's the thing that playing in the background. It's not even necessarily things that you may be paying attention to. This client, we've been working together for years now, but when she went through her divorce, she had been a stay-at-home mom and decided to return to the workforce after her divorce. And as she was negotiating her compensation, we started talking about some of the things that were coming up for her. And she shared a story with me about when she was a teenager, she used to babysit in her neighborhood. And when she had been babysitting for this family for a year, and she said to her mom, I'm thinking about asking for like a little bit more money. And her mom was like, you get what you get. You don't ask for more, essentially was the message. Well, now here this woman is in her 50s going back into the workforce. And that message from when she was 13, 14, 15 years old is playing in the background around her negotiations for compensation. And she's telling herself this story of it's not okay to ask for more, right?
Yeah.
These are the things. That's a totally normal story. There are lots of people who have that experience growing up. There are lots of people who have experiences, being told that they're bad with money and so they can't make good decisions, right? For years, people hear these messages. People are told that money will lead to greed or evil behavior, right?
Yeah.
Things that they want to make sure that they're staying away from. So when we start to really recognize these things, we can look for the evidence of whether or not they're true or false, right? And for a lot of these messages that are holding people back and are creating these big obstacles, there's not a lot of evidence to support the message. And so when we can really unpack that, that helps people to kind of get through wherever they're stuck.
I love that. I think we can all probably point to some childhood stories that relate to our attachment to money or our beliefs around that. So, well, Leah, as we wrap up of our conversation today, and so helpful to have these 6 pillars for intentional money, for people that might be starting the divorce process or rebuilding life on the other side, what do you hope sticks with them from our conversation today?
Well, first and foremost, get the book, Intentional Money, The Modern Woman's Guide to Building Wealth, Purpose, and Peace. But that's what it's about. It's about building purpose and peace, right? And allowing people to be in the driver's seat of their financial decision making. And that's what I really want people to come away with, is to know that even if they feel like they're floundering a little bit, they can start to look at the different pillars and start to find, where do I need to focus a little bit more time in order to feel more confident and more empowered moving forward?
I love that. And something that's sticking out in my mind is I keep seeing Mel Robbins in my Instagram feed, and she's constantly talking about not waiting for a feeling, but taking action, and that's how you get it. And so I know strategy needs to come before action, but even just taking one small step here can be the right way to go. So Leah, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was wonderful to have you on The Details.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Leah. I don't know about you, but I am immediately going to go see if there are any forgotten bank accounts or dollars that I can claim. What a great tip from today's conversation. Finley's sitting here with me, and we want to say thanks for listening along to The Details. We hope you'll hit that follow or subscribe button, and we'll see you next week on The Details.